So if you'd please turn to page 8. And this is the topic, A Vision of Deeper Spiritual Awakening. So Sharon, do you want to get us started off?
All right, sure, happy to. When we arrived in Emotions Anonymous, many of us were just trying to cope with life, to survive. We felt overpowered and controlled by our emotions, usually our negative ones. We turned to the steps and promises along with the slogans and other EA tools. These all helped us to cope and stabilize.
As we continued to work our program, and with our higher power's help, changes started to occur. Our negative emotions began to have less power over us. For many of us, this recovery was enough. But we may not have understood that more was possible for us. We were content with having stopped the worst of the pain and to have made a few helpful friends in our EA meetings. We didn't realize that we were still in an early stage of recovery. We were still learning to surrender all of our challenges to a power greater than ourselves. Perhaps this was true for other members of our EA home group as well.
But then we started to notice souls who were working the program and seemed to have gone farther. Being around their level of surrender, serenity, and happiness was life-giving for us. Somehow they had found their wings and had learned to fly. We realized that there might be new and more joyous levels of recovery possible for us too.
In this workbook, we learn to identify where we are in our recovery. There are stories to clarify and deepen our understandings along the way. We ask questions about our recovery practices and visualize key moments on our journey. There are new tools for moving into lives of wellness and spiritual awakening. And now we're going to also read the next page, Introducing the Stages of Recovery in Emotions Anonymous. So please turn to the top of page 9. And Sharon, you want to start us out again?
Okay, sure. This workbook goes hand in hand with I will read the heading first, Introducing the Stages of Recovery in Emotions Anonymous. This workbook goes hand in hand with EA's Big Book and other materials to help us on the path to recovery and wholeness. We begin here by introducing 3 stages to chart our recovery through EA's 12 steps. The three recovery stages are surrender, understanding, and thriving.
In steps 1 through 3, we stabilize and surrender what we cannot change to a power greater than ourselves.
In steps 4 through 8, we gain understanding by examining, accepting, and releasing our past.
In steps 9 through 12, we begin thriving, making amends, integrating recovery practices, and relying on power greater than ourselves.
The 12 steps of EA are our roadmap to wellness. Using the steps, we take a journey of understanding our past, accepting the present, and making a new future. We work on these steps one at a time. However, the steps we're working currently may not always gauge where we really are in our recovery. For example, we may be working on step 4, which is a step of understanding. Then we see the cost of a behavior and suddenly find ourselves completely willing to surrender it, as in step 7.
The point is that we can't gauge our emotional state by the particular step that we're working on. We don't assume that our emotional state should be pleasant just because we're working on step 12. We are complex beings, and the healing tools that we need at each moment are unique. That's why it's helpful for us to gain this new larger view of the journey through the recovery stages. In our practices, we have found it useful to think of the recovery stages in 2 opposite ways.
First, the stages are place markers along a forward journey in time where we are growing in wisdom and serenity. Knowing the recovery stages reminds us that there is still more joy to be had and of our higher power's vision for our thriving. It can also remind us of how far we've come and for what we can be grateful. But recovery isn't just a one-directional journey. We don't just move forward. Sometimes it feels like we take 2 steps forward and then 1 step backward. In fact, there can be days, months, or even years when we find ourselves back in the old ways of thinking and feeling.
The second way of viewing the stages of recovery is to see them like seasons of growth. While we're definitely growing, we also have our own unpredictable internal seasons. While we may be thriving in one area, we may be struggling in another. The stages help us to name our current condition so that we can take the appropriate step or tool for it.
For example, we may have something happen that triggers us back into our denial and control issues. We feel confused and unstable. Looking at the 3 stages, we see that we're back at stage 1. We know that it's time to work the first 3 steps and surrender our challenging emotions or issues. Conversely, we may have old, unpleasant emotions, but also have a new understanding of how we got here. We may know exactly what we can and cannot actually change. In this case, our new understanding helps us to see how far we've come and how we're actually beginning to spiritually awaken. We have grown in wisdom and emotional sobriety.
So now we're ready to begin our journey through the steps together. Our purpose is to know that even more happiness is possible and to understand how to welcome the next spiritual awakening that's available for us. Okay, folks, and what we're going to do, our first discussion is going to be around the stages of recovery, but before we start that discussion, we're going to read about recovery stage 1. And so if we would turn to page, Sharon, what page is that?
10.
Page 10.
Page 10.
And the next page. And here's where we want our first 2 readers. Sharon, you want to do that?
Okay. Now, I understood, Kim, that you prefer not to read, so I just kind of need to take a understanding of who we have on board and who we have as readers. I myself can read, and Charlie would read too. Are there others out there who feel comfortable reading today?
This is Greta. I feel comfortable reading, but I'm not sure how my voice sounds, and I may end up coughing.
I know you've got a cold, Greta. And Nancy, are you a reader? May not have Nancy. So
no, I am not.
No, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. All right.
Okay.
So I don't think anybody else out there that just didn't check in.
My name is Katie, but I don't have a book to read from.
Okay, Katie. I think that's
a handicap.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like it's Greta, Charlie, and myself, unless someone wants to clarify for me. Okay, then since Greta has a cold, Charlie, how about you and I rotate this one?
Okay. Greta, if you feel like if she's Sharon's just sparing you, if you do feel like reading some, say so.
I don't mind reading. I just want the podcast to sound good.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
Then, okay, everyone turn to page 10, and I'll start us off on this one. This is recovery stage 1, surrender and stabilization. So just to preview everyone, at the beginning of each of the stages, there's a reading like this to talk about what stage the stage is like. And so this is covering in stage 1. It says at the top, stage 1, surrender and stabilization. In stage 1, we own our need to change and begin our work. We begin to stabilize, and the chaos quiets down. It's steps 1 through 3, and we begin to surrender what we cannot change to a power greater than ourselves. Pass.
You want to pick it up, Greta?
Sure. When we arrive in Emotions Anonymous, we've already hit some kind of bottom. We may be desperate and confused with our emotions out of control. Our behaviors and relationships may not be stable. We have lost confidence and are not even sure of which things we have the power to change. Deep down, we hunger to surrender the things we know we are powerless to change.
It could be that we've had exposures to addictions, codependency, and trauma. We may not be fully functional. We may be living in a kind of victim consciousness. We found that it's best if we give ourselves completely, right at the start, to EA's simple program. Experience has shown us that if we're only half willing, we will stumble more often along the way. In EA, we find a safe place to stabilize and surrender what we're powerless over. Our journey has begun.
There are challenges ahead of us if we want the real peace we are searching for. However, the steps give us a process to manage our lives and emotions in a wise and systematic way. The process takes time, but it works if we are committed to doing what needs to be done along the way.
We arrive impatient, and we want to know what we can do right now to get better. What's worked well for many of us at the start is to just show up and use the EA slogans. Our minds start to get immediate relief just by coming to meetings, reading EA literature, and learning the Just for Today sayings. The wisdom and uplifting messages contained in these simple phrases cut through our confusion and powerful emotions. We get a sense of calm from just arriving. Our meetings are like a timeout from our lives and challenges. We get relief seeing that we're not alone and that there's a reliable path to wholeness. But this honeymoon can fade. To keep moving forward requires doing the steady work of recovery practices in our daily life.
Many of us come to EA seeing only our negative emotions and, if asked, cannot identify any positive emotions we experience. The EA program helps us to explore our positive emotions and qualities with the help of a caring and supportive group. Once we can identify our positive emotions and traits, we can work on learning how to grow and experience them more in our lives. We are freed as we look at our patterns with an open and accepting mind and heart. We know that only this gentle acceptance can heal these patterns as the program promises.
We may unconsciously resist the very change that we need. We have each learned a set of survival strategies that have helped us to cope. Even though many of these strategies no longer work for us, we are still attached to them. In fact, we have become identified with them. They are like a false self, which we have created to gain an illusion of control and safety. The cost has been the loss of our authentic self and knowing our true feelings. The doorway to freedom is full surrender of our old ways of being. Our new willingness is dependent on seeing how our old ways have been making our lives unhappy and unmanageable. We must be on our guard because our minds will try to trick us into believing that our old painful ways might work again.
When we first arrive in EA, our first task is breaking through the isolation of our disease. We must see how deep our habit of isolation is. It is completely understandable that we are afraid of showing our real selves. Many of us don't trust because we've had many past experiences where it wasn't safe to trust. That habit of isolating protected us. We need to be grateful for how that response helped us. Those of us who suffered childhood trauma may have biological responses that are now ingrained. We may be triggered into fearful emotions and choose to be alone, at least in part, to take some time out to recover our perspective. Preferring to be alone can also be an indication that we are simply more introverted and we best regenerate with alone time. Each of us needs to identify ourselves if we are isolating in a destructive way that we wish to overcome, or if we use being alone in a healthy way.
However, recovery requires that we begin to connect and open up into fellowship. Many of us have habits of isolation which no longer serve us. First, we must acknowledge the pain our isolation causes. This gives us the motivation to risk opening up into fellowship. Otherwise, our own resistance to getting connected with others can block our recovery. This resistance may be part of the dysfunction that we hunger to recover from. Once we really open to sponsorship and fellowship, a deeper healing can begin. It is inside of trusting recovery partnerships that we can deeply release our old stuff. Fellowshipping itself is one of our new recovery habits. We work the steps together, not by ourselves. That is why the first word of every step is we.
Thank you, readers. I appreciate that. We're going to just open this up for general comments about what was just read. And So I would invite anyone to say, like, I'm Sharon, and then just talk. And we have a couple questions here.
Okay, so turning to page 11 at the bottom box, an important suggestion. We recommend doing this workbook with another EA friend or on a phone conference. Even better, to do it with a co-sponsor, sponsor, or EA working group. Look for someone who's working the program in a positive manner. We found that many EA members have deep and unseen habits of isolation. Once upon a time, this isolation was part of the strategies that we used to feel safe. Now we may hunger for meaningful connection, but in reality are still very afraid of it. A large part of recovery is coming out of isolation in order to get the wisdom and support that we could never thrive without. We have found that working with others powerfully allows us to go deeper while strengthening relationships with others at the same time. Throughout this workbook, we will invite and challenge you into deepening your journey by working with others. Now we'll begin working together. And so I want to ask everyone to turn to page 30, if you would. I'm just going to skip ahead. And this is where we have the special topic that's called the need for sponsorship and fellowship in our recovery. And we're already on the subject of breaking out of isolation, and this is how we do it. And so, Sharon, let's you and I alternate reading through this, and I'll get us started. Page 30, special topic, the need for sponsorship and fellowship in our recovery. One of the most powerful tools to help people stay emotionally sober in EA is sponsorship and fellowship. Since our disease is one of isolation, we believe that it's extremely unlikely for a person to fully recover and thrive in a 12-step programs without practicing sponsorship or fellowship.
A sponsor is an experienced EA member who offers guidance and support to a sponsee.
Co-sponsorship is when two EA people sponsor each other as peers and work the program together.
A sponsor or co-sponsor is someone who is a friendly face in the meetings.
Maybe the one who comes to know us best.
Helps us work through the program individually.
Is a sympathetic ear for us on our journey.
Is there to offer advice and support.
Becomes a trusted friend.
Is an information resource about the 12-step program.
And walks with us through the steps.
Group sponsorship or fellowshipping, or an expanded form of co-sponsoring. Group sponsorship happens when a group of 3 or more EA friends meet together regularly with the purpose of doing deeper program work together. EA fellowship may be the strongest medicine for the changing of our social roles and habits. We recommend this cooperative approach as an excellent way to go through the workbook. Just invite one or more of your friends to go through this journey with you. We've been surprised to find this partnership work can forge a deeper and more valuable kind of friendship than we've experienced in most other circumstances.
Okay, everyone. So now we're going to leave the topic of fellowship, which we really keep recommending, and we're going to go to page 16 in the workbook. So everyone, please turn to page 16. Okay, this is a special topic discussion that's associated with step 1. What do we mean when we say that we're powerless over our emotions? So I wonder if, do we have any other, I just noticed we got a couple more people on the call. Do we have any other male readers who might be willing to read part of this topic? Okay. Hearing none. Greta, how about if you and I alternate reading this one, the special topic?
That's fine.
Okay, great. Do you want to start us out, Greta?
Sure. Special topic. What do we mean when we say we are powerless over our emotions? EA is unique amongst 12-step programs because it teaches that we members have been addicted to trying to control or avoid our emotions. Many of us have had other addictions to things like alcohol, food, or codependency. However, when working the EA program, we discovered that the purpose of these other compulsive behaviors was to control or avoid our emotions. We have always tried to control our emotional state. It seems we only want to feel good. In EA, we finally learned that we can just accept our emotions. We can actually feel them and learn to live with them. Most importantly, we learn not to identify with either our emotions or our thoughts as ourself. Thus, we learn to develop a sense of self that is separate from our ever-changing thoughts and emotions.
The first step in almost all other 12-step programs is about admitting powerlessness over an outside object, like drugs, alcohol, or food. Other programs focus on admitting powerless over behaviors, like codependency, overworking, or gambling. The EA first step suggests that we are powerless over our emotions, which are inside of us. But in recovery, we find hope in knowing that our painful mental habits are not permanent. Once we open ourselves up to wisdom and help, our emotional lives will change for the better. We can learn to live and act skillfully with our thinking and emotions.
It might be more helpful to say that we are actually powerless over the arising of our emotions and the conditions which formed our emotional habits. Those of us who grew up in dysfunctional homes have a history in biology that created strong mental and emotional habits that are negative and destructive. However, after we accept this fact, there are many, many things we can do to positively change the direction of our emotional lives. So while it's true that I can still be overpowered by my emotions, that does not mean that I'm powerless over them.
There are other ways that we are also powerless. For example, we're powerless about what's already happened. We're powerless to control other people or outcomes. We're also powerless over any thoughts and emotions that have already arisen. We cannot change the place that we're now starting from in our body, mind, and heart in this moment. We have deep habits of body, mind, and emotions. Even though our wise intentions will help us to create new habits, this will take time.
However, there are also many ways that we are not powerless. For example, we now have healing wisdom and support that we did not have before. Using EA's tools and steps immediately improves our emotional journey. We begin with a diligent study that understands the power and effects of our own thinking. We turn our lives over to guidance from a higher power to lead us into a new and empowered relationship to our mind and emotions. We turn to this higher power whenever the gravity of our mental habits starts to take us down the same tired pathways.
We may believe that we really want to get well. However, we've been surprised at how long many of us resist the changes that we so desperately need. Many of us have struggled for years before we really let in the enormity of our problem. We need to see how the momentum of our negative mental habits continues to get in our way. We need to really want to change. Only then are we able to make an effective decision to let go of our negative identity.
We find that step one is not just a one-time admission, but rather we have to take step one over and over. One effective tool we use to effectively practice our first step is the way we introduce ourselves at meetings. For example, two familiar EA check-ins are, I'm Greta. I admit that I'm powerless over my emotions and that my life has become unmanageable. Or, I'm Greta, and I'm powerless over the arising of my emotions, and when I try to deny or control them, my life becomes unmanageable.
Many of us have found that checking in a different way can be very helpful in surrendering what we're powerless over once again.
Once we clearly want to change, then we also need to believe it is possible for us. So besides knowing what we are powerless over, we also need to have a vision for greater happiness that comes from working the program. We found that simply affirming what we can change also makes a huge difference in our EA recoveries. At meetings, you may also hear longtime members introduce themselves in ways that show their own evolving understanding of what they can and cannot change. For example, we have heard members make statements such as,
"Hi, I'm Charlie, and I used to feel powerless over my emotions, but through EA, I've learned lots of tools to be a happier person." Or, "Hi, I'm Charlie, and I'm on a joyful journey through these 12 steps."
we find these statements reveal many deeper truths. Yes, we're powerless over the arising of our emotions. Our recovery begins by seeing that our attempt to deny or control our emotions causes our lives to be unmanageable. Then, through EA, we learn tools which help us to be peaceful, wise, effective, and content.
EA is a place where we get support in learning a healthy, accepting relationship with our thinking and emotions. It's been joyful and empowering over time to watch these liberating check-ins spread through use. We've observed that when members with lots of recovery check in with a new introduction, it's liberating. Eventually, people who have been in recovery for years gain a new and tentative smile as they then try on a phrase such as, "I'm on a joyful journey." You can see them envisioning a possibility for themselves. What is different about their new vision? It's actually focusing on the possibility of wholeness, whereas their beginning vision EA could not have imagined so much wholeness or joy. The bottom line is that although I still may be overpowered by my emotions, that does not mean that I'm powerless over them. Okay, so we're going to have open it up to discussion. Again, just like we did last time. I'm going to go first. We had a couple of, I'm going to say 3 older people in my home group who they'd been around, for more than 20 years in the program, and they weren't using the standard check-in anymore. They weren't saying, "I'm powerless over my emotions." They were quite different. And when I tried it on eventually, I actually noticed a change in myself, like right when I said it. I felt different about my program and where I was, right? So, long story short, our entire group just, nobody talked about it. It just changed over time, where everybody kind of changed their check-in. 2 weeks ago, we had a member in our group who's been there for a while who changed it for the first time. She's a plus 20-year member, right? And she said, "I'm so-and-so, and I'm on a joyful journey." And her whole body language was different. She had a big grin on her face, and her shoulders were up, and everyone else was smiling too. It was like, people can say whatever they want, but it just happened to work for her at that moment. And when she said, "I'm on a joyful journey through these steps," it was different for her. You could just see it. So the only other thing about this reading, about what we say, what do we mean when we say we're powerless over our emotions? It just seems like it's really important to be really clear. This is the Serenity Prayer in operation. There are things, most things, 99% of things I'm powerless over, but there's a percentage of things that I do have some control over with God and with my fellows. And it seems so important I believe that my higher power actually wants me to be both humble and confident simultaneously. Because I need to be humble. I'm completely dependent upon the world and upon my higher power and others. I need to be humble. But my confidence about the things that I am sure about, I trust my higher power. I trust my sponsor. I trust this program. And I also trust this body, mind, and heart to be what it is. And so I have permission to be confident now because I know what I'm powerless over and what I'm not more and more. It's the gift of the Serenity Prayer. So with that, I'll pass. And we'll open up the floor to anyone who wants to check in.
This is one of my favorite pages in this whole book. And there's a lot in this book that I really like. This is called A Compassionate Step 1 Break. And until I worked with the other authors of this book, I had never heard of this. So there's a few paragraphs that we'll read. So I'll get somebody to co-read that with me. And then I'm going to, this is kind of experiential, that there are 4 steps to a compassionate 1 break. And as we go through these 4 steps, while there are certain words describing these steps, I realized that through the years of recovery, in a similar form, I had learned to do this. So again, I attribute the work of the program and my higher power that brings us along in recovery, and now here's a workbook that's describing it.
Well, good morning, Ann. Just hold on a second. I'm going to walk Mom's home to her.
Are you talking, Charlie? I couldn't hear you.
No, that somebody came into the call and doesn't have their mute on.
Oh.
There we go. Now we're good. Go on, Sharon.
Okay, we're on page 19 for whoever joined us. So if someone could help me read, or would I get a couple volunteers? Well, it's just you and Greta, isn't it? So, Charlie, how about you and I go back and forth on this one?
You got it.
Okay, Charlie, me. Okay, you start. I'll start, and then that way I can read the step 1 steps. All right. A compassionate step step 1 break. We want to introduce a practice called compassionate step 1 break. We don't do step 1 just once. After we're on this path, we can end up using step 1 every day. Step 1 is something we can do whenever we notice that our minds have gone south. We take a compassionate step 1 whenever we become aware that we've been triggered and are hurting again.
Being hard on ourselves can be the biggest hindrance to us on the recovery path. We can be mad or disappointed in ourselves whenever we notice that we're triggered or struggling. Our old minds are used to ourselves whenever we are struggling. Besides hurting us, this reduces our ability to respond with wisdom to whatever is triggering us.
These are step 1 moments. We've been triggered back into our stinking thinking or negative minds and need to admit it. We don't need to practice. We're feeling off, thinking off, or acting off first. We know our heart and mind are going down so that we know to take an action to change the direction. Then we need to remember to practice this step with compassion, because judging, shaming ourselves doesn't actually work. Why would we ever want to admit that our disease has returned if we're just going to beat ourselves up for it?
This is why we need to practice doing our step 1 work with compassion. It takes real courage to do this kind of heart surgery. So when we practice being aware or how we've been triggered, we need to be kind to ourselves. Then, when we are really compassionate to ourselves, we find we feel better, and our recovery is stronger too.
All right. Thank you. Charlie, I'm going to ask you to do something while I go through this step. I'm hearing that a couple people don't have a book. Would you do a little word or a short phrase summary of each of these that we can go back to? So if they're taking notes, they can listen the first time, and then from your observation, like the first one might be awareness, that they can get just some bullets to remember, since they're not going to have these 4 paragraphs in front of them?
Yeah, sure.
You understand?
So do you want me to start now?
No, I'll go ahead and read it.
Great.
But
Okay.
you just make side notes on whatever word or phrase might help them that they could take notes and remember it, since they won't have the book to go back to.
Very good. Will do.
Okay, thank you. All right. So how exactly do you take a step 1 break when you've triggered? First, when you notice you've been triggered, simply stop for a moment. Actually take a pause to go within. This means noticing your painful feelings and body sensations and realizing it can be better. Next, second, recall the step to mind. We admitted we are powerless over our emotions, that our lives have become unmanageable. Now, talk with yourself kindly with statements such as, okay, I'm hurting again. This trigger is difficult for me. I'm grateful that I noticed. I'm grateful for my willingness to begin again. Then third, tell yourself, this is normal. I'm not the only one who goes through this. This is part of being human. Ask your higher power for serenity to accept the things you cannot change. Fourth, take some time to actually share compassion with yourself. You can say things to yourself such as, may I be kind and loving to myself. May I be wise and at ease with what is arising. I can live with a kind and accepting heart. May I be wise and patient for the time it takes to heal and grow. May I be at ease with my life. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. While you say these phrases, you can also practice kindly putting your hand over your heart. So, Charlie, were you able to come up with 4 little bullets there that help people understand these steps? And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to give people a couple minutes to kind of take a hold of emotion and work through those steps that Charlie gives you in phrases. And then we're going to just reflect on how that experience was for us.
Okay,
so, Charlie,
will do.
Go ahead then.
Probably you've all thought of step 1 as an awareness step, right? I mean, step 1 is where we actually notice something. So the 4 steps here, the first one is noticing. The second one is acceptance. This is actually happening, as opposed to going right into fighting it. So step 2 is acceptance. Step 3, you're telling yourself this is normal and it's okay. It's human. So we're not alone. This is ordinary. Everyone goes through this. So step 3 is it's normal. It's okay. And step 4 is being kind to ourselves. And I just want to say a word about that. This is one of the main themes in this workbook. Compassion is coming all the way through this workbook. The greatest insight that I think that we perhaps may have been given in this is, you might think of it as when we're awakening. This is a book about spiritual awakening. Let's imagine that there's a bird, right? And it's got 2 wings that it needs to fly, right? Well, the first one is awareness. We have to be aware of what's going on. When we come into the program, we wake up. But it's so hard when we face our difficult stuff, when we find that we've been thrown again. It's so difficult. The only way to handle that is with compassion. So the 2 wings of awakening are awareness and compassion, and this is a process for going through it, noticing it, accepting it, reminding yourself it's normal, it's okay, this is how it is, and then being kind to ourselves. Sweetheart, thank you for showing up, putting a hand on my heart and going, man, you noticed. Instead of attacking myself for negative thinking or negative thoughts, going, I'm going to be kind. Good job. Thank you, mind, for noticing this. And I'll pass.
Thank you, Charlie. Good job. Okay, let's just take just a couple minutes, and I want you to stop and think of maybe a recent trigger that you had or an emotion. Go with something maybe this morning or yesterday, and then take yourself through these 4 steps that Charlie gave you: to notice, to accept, to normalize it, and then to be kind to yourself. And kind of remember how you felt yesterday or whenever that trigger happened, and then how you felt when you took that very same experience of a thought or a feeling or a trigger, and how you felt when you went through the compassion break. So go ahead, and I'll give you a couple minutes for that.
And don't pick something terribly difficult. Pick something light, something that you can kind of manage in a couple minutes here.
Yeah.
The summary of the compassionate step 1 break steps are: first is noticing. The second is actually accepting this is happening. The third is normalizing it. It's okay. And the last one, the 4th one, is being kind, being compassionate with what's there. And then I'm going to continue and just check in as well myself. So I had a chance to use this yesterday. I had a hard day yesterday. My father-in-law had a heart attack. And I was I was being present for my wife and supporting her, as best as I could. And we had a long drive to get back from Grand Marais to get to the cities. And then we had a bunch of stuff to do, and then she had to run out to the hospital. And I was just doing the best I could to support her. But I was so tense and worried, and I was caught in my emotions, and I was triggered, and I stopped, and I realized, wow, I've been just trying to be good, and I'm worried about doing it right, and afraid of not showing up for her, and it hurt. It hurt, like it was this fear, and then also there was my own anxiety because I love him, and so what I didn't do is I had like 3 or 4 hours where I was just being anxious and running around, and I never stopped to be kind to myself, right? And then I noticed it, like went, oh. So at first I stopped, I took the pause and I breathed, I took a breath and I named it. I went, wow, I'm just worried about, letting her down, and I'm also hurting myself, and I haven't given myself a chance to just feel, So I accepted it. It's like, okay, this is normal. This is normal. This is a human thing. Anybody would have reactions like this, Anybody would. And then finally I was compassionate with myself, like, oh, yeah, this is hard, It's hard because I can't fix it for my wife. She's going to go through this, and as good as I want to be, I'm not going to be able to make this right for her. She's, we're still in the middle of it, And so it's just compassion with myself. Everything shifted. Everything shifted because I wasn't trying to be good enough to be okay anymore. I was just being kind with, yeah, this is hard. This is something that's actually happening to me and with us, and I can be kind to myself about it. So it shifted everything, and I feel more vulnerable about it now. I'm in my heart, and I can feel my sadness too. I wasn't able to feel my sadness because I was so worried about, being strong, and I also, in order to be strong, I need to be vulnerable. So thanks. I'll pass.
Thank you, Charlie. Anyone else was there?
Sharon, let's skip to letter M in our reader guide. So, folks, okay. I just want to kind of summarize where we've been going and where we're headed to now. Sharon and I and Greta are leading an overview of the introduction to this new workbook, Welcoming the Spiritual Awakening Within Me. So far, we've been talking about the stuff in the first part of the workbook, just a survey of what is stage 1 of recovery. And we're going to turn ahead now and read about stage 2 recovery next. So if everyone would be willing to turn to page 35 in your workbook. And Sharon, I'll turn this back over to you to choose 2 readers for the overview stage 2 recovery.
Okay. And everybody have page 35 there. Whoever has those pages. Sarah, did you have a book? Did you want to be a reader?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. There are others who do not have a book. So having trouble getting the page turned here. Okay, let's give Greta's voice a break. Charlie, how about you and I read this one?
Sure.
So we're on page 34, Recovery, Stage 2, Understanding. We're moving into the second stage now.
Page 35.
35, what did I say, 32?
34,
okay.
You said, but we're on page 35.
35, thank you. All right. Do you want to go ahead and start? I need to get a little drink of water here.
Sure, I'll take us down to get well. All right. All right, okay. Recovery stage 2 is understanding. In stage 2, we come to understand our patterns. In steps 4 through 8, we gain understanding by examining, accepting, and releasing our past.
To get well, we must first understand how we got sick. Some of us were forced to bury our true selves in order to survive our childhood. If our caregivers weren't able to accept, love us as we were, our fallback was to act as they demanded us to act in order to survive. Our families communicate very clearly how they want us to behave. Because of this, we conform in ways that are approval and awarded to get the love and nourishment that we need.
Many of us also experience trauma that can forever change us. This could be the crippling absence of love, validation, or nurturing. Trauma can also come as shaming, criticism, abuse, or abandonment. We quickly adapt to survive these circumstances. We shut down the parts of us that are being hurt. We put on a mask and develop behaviors that we hope will get us the support and safety we need. Very quickly, our real self can be locked into a deep place as we give ourselves over to this strategy for surviving. These survival behaviors become a counterfeit self. Eventually, we may come to believe that we actually are this made-up self. In fact, our real self is still inside of us, waiting for the moment when we're strong enough. We have to allow our higher power to bring healing to us for the trauma of having had to abandon our real self.
Others may remember having a happy childhood, but then something happened later. We became unhappy with our circumstances or ourselves and couldn't find joy. We may not have liked our relationships or our work, or maybe our circumstances seemed good, but we were unable to find self-esteem, peace, or satisfaction. We began to look for a dependable path to wholeness.
Step 2 takes time to accomplish. Stage 2 takes time to accomplish. We must undergo a journey of deep remembering and mourning. It's important for us to know, as we begin, that we do not have to face everything on our first run through the steps. Indeed, many passes through the steps may be needed to bucket out the muck that's covering up our true self. We're on a journey to deeply understand and release any false beliefs about ourselves. It takes a deep surrender and intention to uncover our true selves.
Our early focus is regular meeting attendance, working the 12 steps, and working the tools of the program. If we've experienced trauma in our life, some of us also find a great benefit in therapy. Many of our challenges involve facing our habit of needing to be in control and our difficulty handling conflict. It may be necessary to go to more than one meeting per week and have more than one sponsor or type of sponsorship. Then we get the courage and strength we need by turning our shortcomings over to a higher power of our understanding.
We find that many of our core addictive patterns are similar. We often have fear-based personalities, which we keep alive through habits of control or avoidance. By facing our fears and other primary emotions directly, we find that they lose their power over us. We begin digging deeper by doing our own personal 4-step inventory.
Thank you. One of the things that we really wanted to point out when we started talking about the recovery stage 2 is that recovery stage 2 is steps 4 through 8, examining, accepting, and releasing our past. But what we're going to be discussing here is an awareness. Perhaps you are an individual who feels kind of stuck. You can't quite get to the 4th step. Or perhaps you've heard of others in your group talk about the difficulty of doing steps 4 and 8. But one of the things we wanted to point out is if we get stuck in the steps 4 through or 8 particularly, what we're doing is kind of arresting our movement through recovery by not wanting to go in to do a 4th step, and there's a myriad number of reasons. We want people to be impressed whether you do the workbook yourself or whether you are facilitating a group. We want to highlight the importance of doing step 4 because that will enter into stage 2. It moves people forward in recovery. So we would like to just open up our discussion here for feedback on this, on whether you could do you see the need for step 4 as moving you, a person, yourself or someone else, as doing step 4 as part of initiating, entering, taking a step, moving forward, being determined, being committed to yourself. Do you see step 4 as a movement into stage 2 recovery? So I just want to open that up to people because it is a step that we get stuck on, we're reluctant to do. So I ask you to share your personal experience, whether you've done 4th step or not. We can learn from each other, and we see this.
This is Charlie again. If you would all be so wonderful as to turn to page 45. in the workbook. And you'll see that it's the beginning of a new special topic, understanding typical roles in dysfunctional families. So what we're going to do is I'm going to first set the context for this. The reason that this is attached to Step 4 is that this is a different way of doing part of our Step 4 inventory. So we can list our character traits, and another way we can go at it is we can go, oh, what were the roles that my mother played, my father played, what role did I play? So that's why this is attached to Step 4. So I'm just going to take us all the way through this worksheet, all right? Special topic, understanding typical roles in dysfunctional families. One important part of our fourth step is understanding the role we played in our family of origin. Nature is wise. When we come into the world, our minds are wide open to learn how to survive and grow in the place where we're born. In a functional family, the child receives adequate attachment and affections, safety and security, and finds its purpose and meaning. If we're born into a dysfunctional family system, we survive and grow by choosing roles that are acceptable to our parents and family. Later on in life, these roles may no longer serve us. As recovering adults, we may need to understand the roles that we chose so that we can be free to choose new roles. The chart below shows just a few of the typical roles that are learned and played out in dysfunctional families. See if you can name the major roles that you and other family members played in your childhood. And then
Charlie, can I interrupt a second?
Go ahead,
For
Sharon.
those who don't have a workbook, can you just give a real quick little description of the two circles and the boxes underneath so they can get a visual of what we're doing?
So grab a piece of paper and a pen, and then we're just going to put 3 different boxes on it. We're going to make an inverted triangle. So imagine drawing a triangle that's upside down, and in the upper left, draw 1 circle. On the upper right, draw a 2nd circle, and then down below, draw a 3rd circle. The 3rd circle down below, represented by the boxes in the bottom, that's the role that we might have played. And then the top 2 roles are like what role that your parents might have played. Now, very often in a dysfunctional family system, the upper 2 boxes, one of those roles, mom or dad, might have been in some way dysfunctional, like addicted or abusive or dominating or absent or hoarding, and then the other person was the person who kept the family going, the enabler or the codependent. So very often those are the roles that are, but it can be different. It can be 2 addicts side by side too. The point is to get that this all offers us some of the different kinds of roles that happen. So now I'm going to read through this. In a typical family, very often there's a dysfunctional person, that's the addict or the abuser over there on the left. There's also an enabler or codependent very often on the right. And then down below, those boxes on the bottom are just a few examples of what some of the kids might have played their role. On the left on the bottom, some of us might have chosen to be the hero or the superachiever. Some of us might have chosen to be the black sheep, the rebel, the troublemaker. Some of us might have ended up being the victim, the silent child, or the scapegoat. Some of us might have turned into the peacemaker, the family counselor. That's kind of like the codependent or enabler role. Some of us might have been in the last box on the right, a joker or a clown. And there's more roles than this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to first talk to you about how this affected me and where I got to this the first time, right? So I'm in a 12-step group, and I get a good sponsor, and he draws something of this diagram for me. This is 25 years ago, right? And I immediately recognize, wow, I didn't play just one role. I played more than one, because originally I was the black sheep in my family. I got into a lot of trouble. But our family got a divorce, and I ended up locked up for a year. When I came back, I turned into the family peacemaker, the family counselor. So I was able to recognize it. But what was really interesting was instantly all my brothers and sisters, their roles, filled in for me. It was clear to me that my brother Jim had always been the joker, and that my sister Peggy, my oldest sister, became a doctor. She was the hero or superachiever, and it was so helpful for me to start thinking about it in terms of this is how we all fit in. My brother Jim wanted to be wanted. He got it through humor. My sister Peggy wanted to be wanted. She got it by being really smart. When I became the family peacemaker or counselor, it's because I wanted to be wanted. Now, it's not to say that there's not a useful role to these things. The only downside to taking these roles is when I do it compulsively. It's a survival function in my family. If I didn't take my role, people got uncomfortable. Then it was interesting for me to see my parents. It was clear to me that my mom had a mental illness, and that she would check out, and then there was times that my dad was managing the show, and then there was times that my dad would be the one to check out, and he had an anger issue. He could, he would beat us with a belt, and or worse, and then my mom had a different role of keeping it going. Now the value of understanding this was tremendous, because all of those things in the 4-step inventory, originally I was the black sheep. Why would I have ever become the black sheep? Why would I take on the troublemaker? Well, it's because I needed attention. There wasn't a place for me. I was behind the curve. I didn't understand. I was confused at a lot of time. I was hyperactive. I was oppositional. I was defiant. I still wanted attention, and that was the way I was going to get it. Also, I was angry because I wasn't getting positive attention. So I was still trying to, through that role, I was still trying to get attention, to get love, and to state that I was angry. So the key thing to understand with all the roles is that we are trying to fit in and to be accepted through our different roles. There's a purpose to it, and there's a positive purpose to it. Once I named it, that by the time I got into working the 12 steps, I was already, a caretaker, a family counselor, a peacemaker. It's important for me to understand, first of all, there's value to that role. And so it is Ashante, J, not sure that name. Somebody has to be muted there. Somebody's got background sound.
Is she thinking it's your last name, or is she thinking it's Fawn?
Can somebody mute themselves?
Receiving information regarding this case, as well as a link to TMOK.com, so you'll be able to find your status updates.
Greta, I think it's you. I think you got some background sound. There we go. Okay. Sorry about the interruption, folks. So the point before we open up the floor to check-ins is that we choose these roles. We may shift roles, and it's helpful to name the roles so that we can see where our character traits come from, and that they're survival patterns that we learned. And that once we notice that, wow, it's not who we really are, it's possible to let go of a false identity that we've got and still keep the good parts of it. Like it's useful for me to use my skills and be helpful. I don't want to being a recovering codependent as I am doesn't mean that those character traits are bad. It means they just have to be brought into balance. So with that, we're going to move into a check-in. And what I invite everyone to do is to take a look at the box and circle, if you've got one. If there's a character role that you yourself have identified with, circle that. If you don't see a role that you've got, that you've taken on in your family, write it in. And then in addition to that, looking at this chart, how about your parents? Was either of them in some kind of a compulsive behavior role, like a gambler or an addict or an abuser, or someone that was had a mental illness and couldn't show up or was reactive? Was there a person who was an enabler, a codependent that kept things going? How about your brothers and sisters? Did they fall into any of these roles of the hero, the black sheep, the victim, the family counselor, or the joker? So then write in their names next to those boxes. We're going to take a minute here while you do that. And while you do that, I'm going to just keep on talking about that. So again, there's other roles that are besides this that we take on. And then when you have that, what we're going to do is to, Sharon's going to check in, give us a model about what roles she picked up in childhood, and then after Sharon checks in, we're going to open the call up to other people to name what role that you took on yourself, and if you feel like it, naming one other role that you noticed in your family. So Sharon, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. Yes, I was, there were kind of like two sets. I had two older sisters, 5 and 7 years older. Then Mom and Dad married, and I was the oldest of 7. And when I ran into the recognition of the family roles, I could definitely see myself as the super achiever. Not that I met up to anything I achieved, but I had this drive to achieve. I wasn't. I had depression as a child, so school was very difficult, but I never lost the drive to, I should get better grades, I should take care of the kids, I should take care of the house, just a lot of shoulds, and set myself aside in all of that. And then by us understanding the roles that we can fall into and that we can shift those roles, when I get triggered, I tend to fall back into the victim and the silent child. I had depression for 50 years, and I never told my family about the depression. I just suffered silently, and I feel quite abandoned many times when I get triggered. So I find those two roles kind of go hand in hand for me at different times. What is interesting is that I can see my dad as the super achiever and Mother was the victim. And so it was interesting to me that I kind of absorbed those roles that my parents displayed. And I'll pass.
Okay, and so now we're going to invite 3 other people to take about 3 or 4 minutes each, if you want that much, to check in on what role you might have played, and perhaps another role that you notice of another family member. And the floor is open. Who'd like to go?
This is great.
The first healthy way to look at the roles that we took on in childhood is gratitude, because there's a part of us that figured out a way for us to survive and to fit in our families, and there are still character traits that are associated with them that are good. So it's not a black and white thing. This is another way to do the 4th step, to gently see, this is why I do that. And then the understanding of what I do and why I do it helps us to have greater freedom to let it come into balance. So, Sharon, we're going to move on now. We've got 38 minutes left, so we're going to have to skip a little bit faster.
Okay.
Folks, would you all turn to page 62? And then, Sharon, if you can keep this topic in total to 5 minutes.
All right. I'm thinking about how to do this. All right. I think what we'll do on this one is just present the topic. It goes along with step 6. It has 2 parts, thought replacement and then relaxing and releasing. We're just going to do the first part on thought replacement. I found thought replacement extremely critical to my recovery. After I was hospitalized for depression, I understood, I'm sure that was my higher power working because I'd never had the concept before. I had to understand that I was not my depressed thoughts, I was not my anxiety, but that I could be the observer of my depression, my characteristics of depression. I could be my observer of my anxiety and say, oh, okay, there you are. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to enter into my depression. I'm not going to enter into my anxiety. Instead, I'm going to do this. My way was going into prayer and meditation as a means of just letting all of that depression or anxiety behind me. Other people have other ways. It ended up to be like a little dance that I do, aware, detach, and center, aware, detach, and center. So this page 62, this special topic focuses on people who are able to find, utilize, or create their own affirmations. There are different reasons why people either can do affirmations. There's the people who can tend to believe them. I was the opposite. I didn't ever do affirmations because I didn't believe them. I believed the depression. So it would not be until later that I was able to do that. So, Charlie, do you want to read that first paragraph for us? Charlie?
Yes, Sharon. So everyone,
okay.
we're at the top of page 62, and it's called Doing Our Part in Step 6, Ways to Change Negative and Obsessive Thinking. You might ask yourself, well, why is this part of Step 6? Well, Step 6 is we're entirely ready. And it isn't until we notice our own negative thinking that we're actually able to give up the things that we're attached to. Before we can surrender it, we have to give up our clinging on to our own negative thinking and habits. So that's why this is a part of Step 6. Okay, ways to change negative and obsessive thinking. There are ways to change our habits of mind. Once we see how our thinking and emotions are hurting us, EA has a variety of ways that we can begin to change our habits of mind. The first is to accept where we are and be open to a new way of life. To change our negative thinking, we will now discuss 2 new tools, thought replacement and relaxing and releasing.
Thought replacement, replacing negative thinking with positive. We have a tendency to believe everything we think. That's critical in EA. However, many of us think many of the things we think are not true. We need to ask ourselves whether our thoughts are true. After all, what we put into ourselves comes out later. If we put bad thoughts or allow bad thoughts in, then our experiences can go bad. When we put good thoughts in, and our experiences can become good. We start putting good stuff in now whenever we notice our thinking is negative. We could think of the list below as affirmations. But perhaps a deeper way to see them is a new belief that we are working to adopt, and we know we'll need our higher powers' help to believe in them. Charlie, I'm going to make a shift here a little bit. We were going to circle these as we read them. I'm just going to read a few examples of affirmations. Then I'm going to flip over into how to create one's own affirmations. And then I suggest that we go down to S and T and pick up those 2 topics at S and T given the time we have.
Let's skip the creating our own affirmations part, Sharon.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
right. Go on.
Do you want to do the exercise we were going to do, circling this affirmation that you want to try?
Yeah, let's just
everybody why we do this.
Yeah. So this is simple. Everyone's looking at page 62 and 63, and those who don't have a workbook, you'll hear us read them aloud, and then just notice which ones you need to hear. Like you go, ding, and your heart feels better because it's true. All right, go ahead, Sharon.
Okay. I think people without books is why this is going to be kind of not too helpful, Charlie.
And we are pleased to announce that this workbook is now available for download off of the website. Yay!
Yeah. I think someone on the call had trouble finding it there, so maybe if we have time at the end, you might say a little bit more about where they can find it.
Great, we'll do.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and read these affirmations. I'm aware it's always possible to connect to my higher power. May I know that I'm good, safe, whole, and enough. May I only choose to be grateful and pleased with myself. I am grateful for the gifts I received. Today I accept myself as I am. I can stay peacefully present. I choose to quiet my thinking. I choose to remain calm. I lovingly validate myself. I welcome others to think and feel about me as they will. I know I have more than enough time to live playfully and peacefully today. I relax, do my best, and know my best is good enough for today. If I look, I can find some happiness and peace every day. I choose a trusting, peaceful, celebrating relationship with myself. I accept the process of change, including the difficult parts. I am willing to take all the necessary risks to change. I am patient with the time it takes for me to change. I trust that others are growing, and I am patient with the time it takes them. I more easily and naturally find balanced responses to my cravings. I am becoming content with myself. I am taking life more lightly and laughing more easily. I treat myself with dignity and respect. I look for the good in myself, others, in the world. More and more, I live from my heart. I see beauty in myself, in others, and in the world. If I notice I'm afraid, I relax and surrender it to my higher power. From now on, I work towards accepting, valuing, and appreciating all parts within me.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you, Sharon. So everyone, just notice which one that you really resonated with you, and take it with you. Keep coming back to this, and find the ones that you need to memorize as a practice. I know for myself, I have no less than 15 affirmations that I say to myself when I need them. It's like showing up for myself in a difficult situation. Like, for example, I have plenty of time to live playfully and peacefully today. Not on this list, but it's important for me. Okay, and then now a preview about the rest of the session. We've got just about a half an hour left, and the rest of what we're going to do is to sort of preview, just take a quick look at the other things in the workbook, and also talk about how to start our own workbook study groups, perhaps with our home group, perhaps online. So that's basically what we're going to do for the rest of the day. If you would all turn now to page 77. And this is the beginning of a section on codependency recovery within EA. And so it's a special topic, why are codependency issues part of our EA recovery work? And we're not going to get to go all the way through this section, but first of all, just notice the first page there says why, we need to work with EA program. On page 78, it says understanding the link between codependency and our emotional addiction. Very important, because our emotions are triggered with our interactions with other people. So our relationships are the source of our emotional habits. And then on page 79 is a member story, challenging codependency like my life depends upon it. Make sure you read that one, because if you found yourself killing yourself trying to be good enough, if you found yourself killing yourself trying to help other people too much, or taking care of people that shouldn't, this is a story from somebody else who's been there. And then on page 81, on questions for understanding our codependency. And this is actually the beginning of the work. This gets into the work of actually starting to let go, name and recognize and let go. What I'm going to do before we turn away from this topic is I'm just going to read the first two paragraphs on the top of page 77. It's kind of like, why do we have to do it as a part of our recovery work? So going back to page 77, why are codependency issues part of our EA recovery work? Sharon, why don't you get the first paragraph and I'll get the second one.
Okay. Just a reminder, I thought you were going to read 2 and 3.
I think that I'm just trying to shortcut, Sharon, just for time.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. We include this section on codependency at the end of step 8 because we may find that healing our codependency is the first amend we need to make for ourselves and others. Codependent thinking and actions can be a huge part of how we harmed ourselves and others. We did this through years of dysfunctional relationships with poor boundaries. Now that we're done with making our initial 8-step list, we want to explore together our personal habits of codependency. We may find that our codependent habits are behind many of the incidents we've listed, which we are making amends for. So, by understanding our habits of codependency, we will be able to investigate a new and important layer of our 8-step recovery inventory.
There are other 12-step programs that focus specifically on recovery from codependency. Some of us EA members are also members of one of these other programs. However, working 2 different 12-step programs may not be necessary or practical for some of us. Therefore, we found that in our recovery in Emotions Anonymous requires that we address codependency as a part of our EA recovery program. We have found that a focus on recovery from codependent patterns is necessary to reach stage 2 and 3 recovery in EA for any of us who have these codependency patterns. There are many reasons that we know this. First, the very presence of our emotional addiction points to the kind of original family that might produce codependent patterns. Second, EA is a community recovery program. We know that when we come to our groups and to our fellowship, we will bring our codependent patterns with us. Therefore, in our meetings and fellowshipping, we will all tend to continue our codependent patterns even in recovery work circles, unless we are conscious about them. Okay, so that's all we're going to say about that. We're encouraging everyone to work this section of the workbook. And again, the purpose of today's call is to really get you excited about working it and get you ready to talk to other people as you start to get workbook study groups going, getting them ready to say, hey, this is important, let's do this, you know. So now we're going to move on to stage 3. We're going to all turn to page 84, and Sharon's going to take us through the next reading.
Okay, so does somebody want to help me read page 84?
This is Greta. I can help.
Okay, great. I'll get started, and then you can pick it up where the journey to thriving. Thank you.
Okay.
Recovery stage 3, thriving. In stage 3, we discover and start living a new vision of thriving relationships with self, others, and our higher power. We deepen our emerging new self and move forward into confidence and thriving. In steps 9 through 12, we make amends, integrate new recovery practices, and rely more upon a power greater than ourselves. Stage 3 recovery is about refining our relationships with self, others, and God from a spiritual perspective. It usually becomes easier to realize a loving relationship with our higher power once we have done most of our stage 2 recovery.
The journey to thriving. All along our journey, we've noticed some of the promises come true. Then one day, because we've worked hard and surrendered, we are graced to hear a deeper call. We realize that we finally want all the promises of the program more than any of the other substitutes we've been putting first. We realize that we're willing to do whatever it takes to fully uncover our wholeness and joy. We begin a new phase of our recovery, thriving. Our minds, hearts,
all right, go ahead.
Our minds, hearts, and habits have changed. Our patterns of thinking and behaving are transforming. We've left behind the negative traits that we needed before. We found some balance with compulsive habits around emotions, food, media, drugs, and busyness. We're starting to make progress even in recovering from our codependent roles. We're grateful, but we are ready for even more. Partly it's because we've become more sensitive. We feel the difference we've made having a good diet, good friends, exercise, and good recovery habits. Now, we can feel if we're going astray. But this new sensitivity is calling us now to even deeper levels of recovery. In this next phase of our growth, circles of fellowship with other motivated EA 12-steppers are a primary place we get the inspiration, wisdom, and support that we need. These deepening relationships are special. They can become some of the most meaningful connections of our lives. They are oriented around commitment to transformation, authenticity, love, and service. They are also a safe place of surrender to the higher power guiding our shared work. They are real places of refuge. Even though we've been in good recovery for years, we will keep finding unfinished business. We may suddenly see an issue that we were blind to before because we're finally ready to see. We now see these continued growth opportunities as good, natural, and normal. In our fellowship circles, we are now comfortable challenging each other to be active in our programs and sponsorship. We are more comfortable just being ourselves and being present. We find that we are now attracted to different kinds of people. We are attracted to souls who seem to have gone beyond. Being around their level of surrender, serenity, and happiness is life-giving. Somehow they found their wings and learned to fly. We realize that there might be new and more joyful levels of recovery possible for us too.
Thank you, Greta. Part of working on the workbook with the team that was across the United States and grasping the idea that there were stages of recovery and then being introduced to thriving was a real step forward for me. The others were used to checking in. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm powerless over my emotions, but I'm on a joyful journey. And I began to realize that that was important for me to identify where I was in my journey of recovery. And when in the appendix, Bill W. has a letter where he was in the 12-step program for 20 years before it dawned on him he now had emotional sobriety. So by grasping the characteristics of thriving, it was a real, it was almost like a transfusion for me. I was like, oh my gosh, I have gone through a lot. I have recovered. I have worked the steps. And now I am thriving. And where that helped me to identify where I was I was more ready to even, in a shorter period of time, to grasp the tools of the program. I was less likely to fall into the depression or the anxiety because it's like I've been there, did that, I can do this. And I just, it was like adrenaline to me, and that I could rely on myself, I could rely on my higher power, I could rely on the program. So I would invite a couple other people two people we have time for, a couple minutes, if you would like to respond to what you heard reading, understanding.
And so if everyone would turn to page 85, we're just going to kind of flip together and look together. So turn to page 85 where step 9 starts. So like all the other steps, there's a guide through there. There's a step 9 story on page 86. There's questions for working step 9 on page 87. Now flipping to page 91, there's a special topic, forgiving myself and others. Then it goes on to step 10, and flipping to page 96, there's a kind of a special insert on page 96 called a story called Mindfulness and Kindness in My Daily Inventory. So in the same way that we learned to practice step 1 compassionately and to practice step 4 compassionately, it's learning to practice step 10 compassionately. It's a beautiful story. I hope you enjoy it. Then page 98, another reminder to work the workbook and to work our programs using sponsorship and co-sponsorship. It's just, we found that it transforms our whole path. All the people who have been involved in this project have just agreed that fellowship is indeed half of the program. Then page 101, there's another special topic. You all know the 4 A's that we have in EA: awareness, acceptance, attitude, and action. And so this is using the 4 A's as a form of doing the 10th step. Try it. I think it's really fascinating. And then we get into step 11 on page 105. We're into the thriving sections here. Page 109, something called the practices of wholeness. And we're starting to get into the practices that are really all about thriving. Finally, let's skip past step 12 on page 112 and go to page 113, where we have the reading that's called Recognizing Our Spiritual Awakening. Now, I deeply regret that we do not have time to read all of this. We have to make choices. Actually, you know what? Let's do it. We'll do this as a close. We're going to come back to this because this is a lovely way to close our call. And instead, what we're going to do is talk for a little bit about starting our own groups or getting people that we know, co-sponsors, to work with us on this. Or people who might be interested in having a phone-in workbook group to do this long-term. So the first thing I want to do is draw your attention to some stuff that's available on the website. When you go to the workbook, when you go to where you download the workbook or where you order it next time, where you order the workbook on the EA website, right below it, you're going to find a button. And that button says Download Workbook Handouts. And those handouts are what you need to run an EA workbook meeting. There's 5 pieces inside of it. I'm just going to describe them. The first is a sample agenda for how to run a meeting. And so it's got some of the things that are common to the way that we run our regular EA groups. You know, we start with a serenity prayer. There's no crosstalk guidelines. But it's a way to run a meeting where we have a little bit more conversation about the topics than we might normally get in a meeting. And then in the very back of this workbook, I want everyone to just flip to the very last page of the workbook, page 136. You'll see that there's a sample workbook study schedule. This thing is run out over the course of 24 meetings. And so if you're having one meeting at a time, that's 24 meetings sequentially. Some of you might remember that there are 52 weeks in a year. And then looking at 24 weeks, you might notice to yourself, my goodness, that's almost a half a year. You can set your own schedule. We just completed one of these. In Apple Valley, we just completed a half-year cycle of running through the workbook. Our last night is this coming Tuesday, I'm so happy to say. So this is a guide for, in the column there, it talks about what you do on week 1, the next column, what it is, then it tells what pages it is. If you want to do related workbook study, it tells the associated, or big book study, it tells the associated pages that are in the big book in column 4 there. And then finally, homework. What things to do between the meetings for all the participants. So very, very clearly laid out. And then, again, the things that are downloadable. When you go to the website, where the workbook is purchased, on the button below it, it's one document that has 5 things as a part of it. It will also have frequently asked questions for people who are trying to run and start a workbook. So some thoughts about that. The easiest way to do this, if you have a home group already, is to, in the business section of the meeting, just say, there's a new piece of literature that runs through the 12 steps. We've been reading the workbook. How would people be willing to, run through the workbook together in the same way that we do it in the regular meeting? Just propose going through it. So that's the simplest way to do it. Bring it to your home group. Ask them to go through the workbook, just one time through. A second way to go through it, we did in our Apple Valley home group here in Minnesota. Our meeting time happened to be scheduled for 7 o'clock p.m. And what we did was we started a workbook group earlier, before that. So pick an amount of time you want to have for your meeting. In our case, we allowed an hour and 15 minutes beforehand for people to show up. And then everyone who wants to show up for the workbook shows up in advance of the meeting. And then continue on to stay with the regular meeting. We chose to do it in a different room in the same building. On another point, I did a sample work group in a different place, and what we did was we met in a corner of the room so that when the regular group started to show up, we were able to continue until it was just time for the meeting to start. So the way to make that happen with your home group is simply to, in the business part of the meeting, just put your hand up and propose, say, hey, I want to start a workbook group. It's going to meet before the regular meeting, and here's how we do it. A third way to go about doing it is to just pick somebody that you think that you already trust and have some fellowshipping, and just start a co-sponsoring relationship with them. Say, hey, are you willing to go through this workbook? And maybe we can get a third person. Just invite a person directly, to do that. And then finally, a fourth way to go about it is to join an online group or to create one. I thought that we had one. I thought that we had an online group that was going to start on Monday nights, but I had a misunderstanding. So it was my intention to do that. So one thing that we can do is we can ask right now, is there anyone who's interested in having an online workbook study group? And it's not making a commitment. It's just showing interest. And so let's have anyone who has an interest in being involved in an online study group just check in at this time.
This is Greta. I'd be interested.
This is Sarah. I'd be interested. There's a lack of home groups, face-to-face groups here.
This is Nancy. I'd be interested, especially if we could call in, because I sometimes have trouble with computers.
And yes, we can.
Yeah, I'd be interested too, Sharon.
Yes, if we can call in, I would be interested too. This is Kim.
All right. Sharon, can I put this on you? That is to say, would you be willing to share contact information so that people could ping you afterwards so that you'd be able to have an email discussion about this?
Sure. My email is Sharon, SHARON, High, HIGHB, as in boy, B, the number 2, at iCloud.com. Sharon, High, B2 at iCloud.com. Beautiful. That's 5 people that could do that, and then you can work it out by email discussion. So I also want to point out now page 121. All right, go to page 121, everybody. This is the beginnings of a gratitude journal. It has there's a article on the left about the importance of gratitude in our recovery, page 120, and then this is the beginning of just what's 7 pages of a gratitude journal. So I just want to point out that this is another option of going through here. And then now finally the appendix. Don't think of the appendix as an appendix, please. Please think of the appendix as more readings that we couldn't squeeze into the regular workbook that are excellent. So you'll go through there and you'll find a bunch of really wonderful stuff, including Bill W.'s original letter in the Grapevine, which he wrote directly to people who had enough sobriety about thriving, when he noticed that after 20 years, he was just starting to name this thriving, what he called emotional sobriety. And now, to close, what we're going to do is turn to page 113. The article Recognizing Our Spiritual Awakening. And we're going to start to read it, see how far we get in a couple minutes, probably read about 4 paragraphs. Sharon, you want to start out with paragraph 1? Sure.
I'll take paragraph. I'll alternate on the other voice.
Okay. Recognizing Our Spiritual Awakening. Working step 12 leads us finally to a most important choice. We must recognize our own spiritual awakening and set aside any shame that has bound us. We will know when it's time for us to make this choice because we become aware that this choice is now possible for us. We have done hard work, and we've been given gifts that we never thought were possible for us. We were blessed by others sharing wisdom and strength that we did not have ourselves. To fully respect ourselves and these gifts of the program, we gratefully accept the wisdom, calm, and confidence that is emerging in us.
We must actually accept these gifts from our higher power if we're to keep them. There's a new us emerging, and we may be the last ones to see it. It's one of those times where we might not actually see our awakening until we believe in it. This is a faith choice. We can recognize and bless this emerging new self. We don't claim to be our own creator, but we do claim that we're being beautifully made. We need to use our faith to own this gift now. All the steps and wisdom along the way have been readying us for this choice.
We surrender any fear or scarcity thoughts. There's a tendency to stay in habits of the mind that we are familiar with. Until we welcome wholeness as ours, uncertainty remains, and we continue to identify with small, false beliefs. But it's okay to let our light shine. Our wise humility is not opposed to this new spiritual confidence. Awakening requires noticing we are awake now. It requires us to get up and live in our awakened state.
And I'm skipping down to the last paragraph on the bottom of the page. What is our mind's reaction to this invitation? To a mind that's been long suffering, it's a radically new idea that we can have a spiritual awakening and actually become happy people. The purpose of the 12 steps is not to go through the 12 steps. The purpose is spiritual awakening. And at the top of the next page, Sharon? You want to read that last paragraph? Or let that be the last one?
What's left after
Standing.
we start sharing? Pardon me? Oh, standing on top of these steps, we now reached a higher place, a place of spiritual awakening, a place of being. Why not stop and look around? How far have we come? Where were we 6 months ago, 5 years ago, or even 40?
And going to the last paragraph, what's left after we start sharing the recovery that we've been given? What's left once we know that we're good people? We find that we're actually living the simple programs that took thousands of repetitions to sink in. We are living the one day at a time, letting go, letting God, and living the promises. We find that we actually have a choice and can say, just for today, I shall be unafraid. Particularly, I shall be unafraid to be happy, to enjoy what is good, what is beautiful, and what is lovely in life. And so now we're going to have checkouts, and what I invite you to do is to say your name and one word. And so I will model that. My name's Charlie, and I'm